Welcome everybody to the 2022 Cybersecurity Think Tank presented by SWICKtech. My name's Anthony Senner. I'm the Chief Information Officer over at SWICKtech. I'll be your host today. So a little bit about SWICKtech and who we are. I see many familiar faces in the room, but for those of you who aren't familiar with SWICKtech, we are a managed security service provider. We're located in New Berlin, just up the road here. We focus on helping organizations with their cybersecurity, compliance, and other IT service needs. We were founded in 2004 and are really excited to be able to put on this event today. At SWICKtech, we do host regular brain food events like this one. The goal is to help educate businesses about new and emerging technologies and also provide a forum for technology-based conversations to help educate business leaders as they are making decisions about where to take their organizations into the future. So why are we doing this today? So every October is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. If you aren't aware, that was implemented in 2004 by the Department of Homeland Security and the National Cybersecurity Alliance. And each October, SWICKtech, along with other organizations in the industry, use this opportunity to, again, help have a forum and educate businesses and have some of those conversations about what is important around cybersecurity and different risks and strategies for mitigation that organizations can take. This year, the theme is See Yourself in Cybersecurity. The focus is on the people part of cybersecurity, which is really interesting. Focused on providing resources, information, and helping to educate the people side of the cybersecurity opponent that we all take advantage of in our businesses, and whether that's on the job, at home, or in schools. As I was thinking about this theme, I go back to what the technology landscape looked like in 2004, how different that was from today, what challenges they were facing, what the cybersecurity threats look like at that time, and how much that's really shifted to what we're facing today. And then if you pivot from that and think about 20 years from now, what is that going to look like? What challenges are they going to be facing? What is cybersecurity going to look like? Especially as technology kind of further goes into becomes more utilized in our personal lives and in our businesses, and how we're handling our home networks, and obviously we're seeing technology in vehicles and everywhere else. Cybersecurity is going to continue to be paramount with protecting all that data, all those systems, and helping to keep all those systems secure. So we got a little icebreaker exercise here, higher or lower, some different cybersecurity stats from last year. So if you feel that the initial answer that you see here is higher, go ahead and just raise your hand or let me know. Again, the first is what percentage of small businesses that made up ransomware attacks in 2021? Anybody think it's higher or lower than 50? See a couple of hands up that it's higher. That would be correct. The answer is actually 75% of ransomware attacks in 2021 were made up of small businesses. The next question is, how often does a cybersecurity attack happen worldwide? Every 60 seconds. Do you think that's higher or lower? See, a little bit of both, actually. The answer is lower. 39 seconds is how often a cybersecurity attack is happening around the world. Percentage of targeted cyber crimes that begin with a malicious email, 85%. Higher or lower? I see a couple of hires. It's actually lower. We had to keep you honest there. So 70% of targeted cyber crimes that begin with a malicious email. Still a very, very large number. Obviously, there's a huge effort, and that's one of the largest attack vectors for most businesses. And then estimated total cost of damages caused by cyber criminals in 2022, $6 billion. Higher, mostly higher. You would be correct. It's actually $6 trillion. Again, I think sometimes you see these statistics and it's really eye-opening. You know the numbers are going to be high, but it's just it's amazing how quickly this is growing and continues to grow. So a little bit about our panelists. To my right here, we have Jason Gunther from SWICKtech. He is a solutions architect. Outside of IT, he enjoys drag racing, working on cars, motorcycles, and woodworking. Next, we have April DeValkenaere. She works with the Waukesha County District Attorney's Office. She's a Wisconsin State Bar certified paralegal and focused on white-collar crime. Also, she owns her own business, Fortress Financial Education, where she assists with financial crimes, investigations, and helps educate people how to advocate for themselves, their loved ones, their clients, and their employees, and how to protect them from financial exploitation. Next, we have Tom Boudreau, Vice President of Property and Casualty Consultant at USI, focused on reducing insurance and risk management costs. He is active in his community, supports Feeding America of Eastern Wisconsin, UPAF, Life Navigators, Lad Lake, and St. Mary Visitation. Additionally, we have Penny Foust, is the first vice president at Signature Bank. She's been in commercial banking for over 25 years. Penny specializes in more sophisticated cash management structures that usually involve lockbox, integrated cash applications, and card solutions. And also we have Jim Temmer. He's the president and CEO of the Better Business Bureau serving Wisconsin. Jim also previously spent 10 years leading museums and cultural organizations around Wisconsin. So a little bit about our panelists. So what we're going to do next is go into some of the questions and open it up to the panelists here, talking about the state of cybersecurity for businesses in southeastern Wisconsin and northern Illinois. We're going to have questions again that are designed specifically for the panelists to comment on best practices in their area of expertise. And then we're going to take questions from the audience. All right, with that, we've got a couple of microphones here for the panelists. I'm going to open it up to them. Our first question for the day is going to be, what is the most common cybersecurity loss or problem that you see?
Well, first of all, good morning. Thanks for joining us. As it was mentioned, I'm with USI Insurance. We're a top 10 broker in the country. Pretty unfamiliar to most Wisconsin folks. We got boots on the ground in 2020 after they acquired the insurance division of Associated Bank and Diversified Insurance, if that those names might ring a bell more. I do work in the cyber space for insurance procurement, but USI also has about 60 people that are non-sales, no quota, non-commission driven, just fixed resources that help support our clients in this particular arena. The most common losses that we see, I mean, I looked at the data yesterday, but ransomware is still accounting for 50% of the losses we see, followed by business email compromise. Then we have just your general network intrusion, and then general malware, and then lastly, which I think is kind of overlooked a lot, is insider threats. And with respect to the slide you had up there earlier, the data we show is 75% of the events that are occurring are happening between companies between $5 million in revenue and $50 million in revenue. So that's what our USI data is showing, along with some other, even I look at our competitors' data as well, and that's all pretty much in alignment. So day to day, those are the situations that we're seeing at USI.
Yeah, absolutely.
Hello, good morning. From the banking perspective, definitely we're still seeing the business email compromises as the #1 area that results in a loss for our clients. And that's just not Signature Bank clients, but the financial institutions overall. Those business email compromises used to be very focused on wire losses. We are seeing the wire transfer, outgoing wire transfer wires declining, thank goodness. It's still a very high number, however. But we are seeing a shift into more losses from ACH, Automated Clearinghouse, another form of electronic payments. The ACH debit losses are increasing. So again, fraudsters realize once things like wire transfers, controls around them being buttoned down, they move to the next available option. So unfortunately, it continues to grow. I would mirror a lot of the comments that Tom had, although our ransomware clients that got affected by that has also decreased, it's still an alarming number. So it's not gone. It's great to see it moving in the right direction, but still something we spend a lot of time and energy helping our clients with.
Yeah, I think I mirror what you both have said, right? It's business email compromise and ransomware. From my own experience at SWICKtech, ransomware is starting to decline as people improve their cybersecurity controls, and business email compromise is on the rise. I think part of that is it's a more low-tech attack on the IT side. These people, they get into a mailbox, not necessarily one at your business. A lot of the cases now it's at another business. they read through the email, they insert themselves into a conversation, and pretend that they're your vendor. Say, hey, you need to send a payment to a different place now, or something along those lines. And it's really, I think, some of the stuff that Penny's going to teach us a little bit later that stops a lot of those attacks. There's not very much we can do in those cases on the IT front. There are some controls we can add, but very limited.
And I would agree with all of them. In regards specifically to what Penny was talking about in the business email compromises from the financial perspective, is we are seeing, actually both Penny and Jason, is that they are becoming more and more involved or in depth in those emails. So they are waiting and not necessarily doing the wire transfers as much. They still are, but now they're pretending to be your vendors, right? And so they're having new invoices drafted that look just like your vendors, but the payment information is going somewhere else. And so we do see significant amounts of that, and I see a lot of that because I'm a financial or white-collar crime paralegal, and so I see all the financial aspects of that. But in addition to that, what we're also seeing is the mail theft. And so a lot of small businesses, right, you either leave your mail on the counter or you leave it in your mailbox overnight with the flag up, and the criminal rings are actually coming around and stealing mail from the business districts. And then what they're doing is they're either creating fake businesses. So if you have a company that ends in LLC, they'll actually create a new business that's the same company name, but it'll end in INC, right? Or something to that effect. And so they'll actually go out and create a business account. After they create that new business, they'll actually register it with the state. They'll create a new business, make it look very, very similar to yours, and then they'll try to cash that check without even changing it. So we're seeing a lot of that as well. And that's why, and I'm sure Penny and I will get into this later, is there's some features out there that you can do from a financial perspective called positive pay that you need to make sure that you're utilizing to make sure that your financial institution is actually identifying if that check is different in any way, that they're calling you. So if an account is being deposited into an account that's not identical to what's written on that check, there's some stopgaps that can try to halt that check being deposited.
Well, good morning. And some of you may wonder, why is the Better Business Bureau represented in a cybersecurity think tank? Well, and it's about the people, and it's about businesses, and this is what we hear. We did a nationwide study on businesses, size of business, and cybersecurity scams, and 18% of people, when asked, do you think it's more likely that your business will get scammed or someone else's business? 18% only said my business, 82% somebody else's business. It's not going to happen to me. And these are the kind of things people said. Well, we have procedures in place. Risk is low in my market. I don't have any employees. Small size, few employees. I'm a business of one. I have virus software. I'm fine. Our employees are educated, and we have not yet faced a business scam. So it goes on and on. So what I would say the number one problem facing in cybersecurity these days is the mindset of the small business people. You're working as hard as you can on your business. This thing is just kind of out there, and you're worried about it, but you really don't know what to do. You don't know how to stop it. And so they kind of shut it off. We've been doing cybersecurity training, the Cybersecurity Month in October, for years and years and years, and it's actually our lowest attended type program we put on. If we do something on HR or something new over here, there, insurance, whatever it is, we have webinars, seminars, they're very well attended. Cybersecurity, crickets. I mean, they know they need it, but they don't know what to do. So it's really an educational effort that we all need to do to let these business people know that it is important, and you could lose a lot. And then if you're hacked and it becomes your customers know it, well, then the trust is gone, right? It's going to go down. They're going to want to go with somebody else. So to remain a trustworthy business, it's really important to have your cybersecurity up to date.
Okay, moving on to our next question. What procedures should a business have in place to verify an ACH or other funds transfer before sending money?
So before that, I mentioned ACH. ACH stands for Automated Clearinghouse. A lot of people get very confused on different electronic payments, electronic funds transfers. You'll hear things called EFTs, and ACH is a form of an EFT, an electronic funds transfer. Wire transfers are. These payment types are all very, very different. I mentioned wire transfers and ACH before. Wire transfers are close to a real-time, same-day movement of money. Their finality of payment. It's the only payment type in the industry, a wire transfer, that's finality of payment. A lot of businesses don't know that. ACH payments are not finality of payment. There's all kinds of rules and regs around ACH payments, whether you're paying consumers or businesses. It's very critical that individuals that are in charge of payments within your company understand those differences and the risk around them and the rules, and count on your bank resources to help educate you on that. You have many things you're dealing with every day, cybersecurity being hopefully at the top of the list. Payments and the payment risk and fraud around that hopefully is in that top 5 as well. But count on your trusted resources for your banks to help educate you. I'm a certified treasury professional. Most financial institutions have them within their organization. Those resources should not cost you anything. Sit down and meet with them once a year to talk about these payment types and the risk around them, so you understand first and foremost what your liability is with these payments, because it does change. It changes whether you're paying a business or a consumer. And this becomes very important about how you verify, because for a business, there's only really a 1-day window once you get an ACH debit or payment, and if it's wrong, if the account information is wrong, it's unauthorized or fraudulent, you only have 1 business day from the time that posts to do something about it. Or technically, the business is accountable for the loss. It's your risk and liability. Most businesses don't even understand or know that until after the fact. Most businesses don't know what kind of insurance they have to cover these types of payments. Is it even covered? Depending upon, who originated it. So when we talk about this, how do you verify? When that account information, when I'm giving you my routing number and account number, and I'm a trusted vendor and partner, it becomes very important to make sure that's accurate, because once the transaction takes place, your window to return that or dispute it is very small, typically 1 business day from the time you see that post. That's not a Signature Bank rule. It's not a financial institution rule, regardless of where you bank. That's a federal reg. So we can try to get the payment back. The Fed's going to turn it right back on us and say it's a late return. They'll say it's fraud. Doesn't matter. Doesn't matter. Nothing you can do about it after that, which is why it becomes important of how you're verifying that information when you receive it. Again, it sounds like a broken record, but the business email compromise, the vendor impersonations now that we're seeing, real invoices where the bank information is changed. How did you verify it? And when I work with my customers, well, they called the person's phone number in the bottom of the email. Do you know that person? Is that the phone number you have on record for that vendor? Was the vendor record changed by someone else in your organization that changed the information? Even if it's the phone number that you're calling to verify, it's so astonishing to me that who can change vendor records within organizations. We've really educated on dual control on payments, but what about dual control on changing vendor information? All the way down to emails and phone numbers, not just the routing numbers and account numbers. So this is a very big deal on how you're verifying and what your policy is, and I'll let other people comment on that as well.
Just to add on to that, I would absolutely agree. I'm so accustomed, I know you're saying 1 business day, it's 24 hours is my understanding, so it's like very, very time sensitive with regards to the business ACHs. And I know that that's different from your personal accounts. So hopefully nobody's commingling their business and their personal accounts, because the regulations are very, very different. But when this question came up too, it's talking about the procedures. And it's not only the procedures of how do you verify that vendor information, which is where we see the vendor impersonations a lot, but it's also what procedures do you have in place to make sure that, like Penny had alluded to, is the authority within your business, right? So who has the authority to make those payments out? How do they verify it? Who is their backup? You know, because you want to make sure that you don't just have one person. And I know with small businesses, it's difficult to have a second set of eyes sometimes on what's occurring, but you really need to have a process in place that you utilize, not just on paper, but the actual process as to who has the authority to make those changes, who has the authority to contact your financial institution and verify information, who has the authority to reach out to the vendors, right? It should not just be the person that opens the mail that receives the check. Oh, well, this is what it says, so we're just going to do it. You know, if it's different than what's in your system currently, somebody needs to be verifying that information. And I know that can seem tedious when it comes to small business because you may not have the staffing necessary, but you really need to have it because of those regulations. And like they indicate, it's not just local regulations or state regulations, it's federal regulations. There's nothing that we can do about that. And when it comes to the fraud, it's incredibly difficult to get those funds back, if at all.
And if I could add, this crosses over so many avenues of your business, regardless of what role you have. So if you're in HR, it could be changing direct deposit information for employees, their routing numbers and account numbers. It's not just vendor situations where you're paying vendors or suppliers or customers receiving funds coming in. It could be you're working on a big project and contractors you're dealing with and payments for the title company or the project, the supplies you're buying for a big project. These pieces are all part of that business email compromise. And where are you educating within your organization? Because it could be a salesperson that's doing business with a new customer. Real legitimate transactions, but the routing numbers and account numbers are being changed. That's what you need to conduct an ACH. But think of how many areas in your organization need to be educated on this. It's not just the people that are in accounting or in the treasury functions doing your day-to-day payments or online banking. It's where did the information come from? Was it a salesperson? Was it a project manager working through a construction project? Think of all of the different parties that are involved. Is it working with your title company? Where did the information come from? If you got it from the salesperson or the project manager, depending upon the situation, this overlaps so many areas of your company, depending upon what's going on, legitimate transactions. But the information's being changed, and how did you verify it? Who did you verify it with? Your trusted individual with inside your organization? Do you know where they got it from? Was it an unsecured email? We're seeing these still as much as we try to get out and educate. And this is a broken record, right? Where did you get the information? How did you verify it? And oftentimes it's still from an unsecured email that you think is from a trusted party.
Just one more add-on to that, because of the staffing issues that people are having. Some businesses are bringing in college interns or younger employees that maybe they're seasonally, just to help out during summer vacation or what have you. Please, please, please make sure that they have their own login. So especially from the HR example, you don't have necessarily a HR intern helping using your current HR person's login information. Never, ever, ever do that, okay? Everybody has to have their own login information so that you can track who is doing what. Because although who you think is an intern is, a great resource and they're doing a lot of great things for you, they may have ulterior motives that you are unaware of, okay? And if they go in and change a direct deposit or change the direct deposit for all your employees, there's obviously concerns there. We want to make sure that that is tracked to that intern and not necessarily to one of your primary employees.
Penny and April just gave me some, made me remember some scenarios I had over the last 24 months. So I did have a $10 million metal fabricator whose user credentials were stolen to access their payroll system, and all those payroll funds were redistributed to the wrong bank account. That was a fun process to get through. And then I'm thinking about, and I usually see the claims after they occur, right? So just last week I had a customer who was purchasing a conveyor system for about $150,000. And the supplier asked for payment, but they were asking for smaller payments in an attempt to circumvent the controls they have, and payments were issued. And so they were out the $150,000. They didn't get that back yet. They have to buy a new conveyor system. They had to pay for the forensics to determine how their email was compromised. So there's a substantial financial loss here when these events occur. So I would encourage you to take their advice and try to avoid these claims.
I'll actually echo on that a little bit, kind of tie some of the concepts that we've talked about together from what we've seen in our experience as well. Is we talked a little bit about the external side of things, and when there's change requests, what we've seen also is a growing number of organizations where their authority structure is identified. So somebody identifies who the executives are, or who's authorized to make payment requests of their payables team or other people inside your organization, and they'll take advantage of that. Whether that's through compromising the authority inside of your business, whether it's your CEO or your controller, and then emailing people inside your organization requesting a one-off payment, right? So making sure that you have checks and balances inside of your organization for those non-standard requests. And we've seen this all the way throughout an organization. We talk about, again, the people side of security, where, again, the authority is identified, maybe it's a general manager in an organization, and they make a request to a shipping employee to go buy several $1,000s worth of gift cards and then scratch them off, and I have to do this for an event I'm doing. And newer employees in your organization, they want to look good to the manager or the CEO, and they run out and on their lunch break and spend several $1,000s of their own money thinking they're going to be reimbursed. And they're really sad stories, but again, this really impacts so many different areas of organizations.
Yeah, I think to add a little bit, right? There are some technologies we can use on the IT side to reduce the risk here. They can't prevent it, but they can help. SPF, DKIM, and DMARC. DKIM, DMARC. These are anti-spoofing technologies. So they make it so it's very hard to impersonate another business with email, which is something that was previously very easy to do. DKIM in particular signs messages. It's meant to prove their authenticity. This can be really important when you're in one of these situations and finger pointing starts to happen. Oh, it was on your side, it was on our side. If DKIM is in place, it helps us say this message definitely came from here, which puts you in a much better position with insurance providers and things like that. There are also anti-phishing technologies that we can add to M365 to help recognize some of these things, right? They're not just looking for external threats, but now internal threats as well. That technology is growing and changing rapidly. So these can help, right, catch things going on. Almost every example I've seen of business email compromise, pay really close attention to the opening and closing of the email, right? They're never what somebody would normally say. Never strong wording, excuse me, but very commonly, the way somebody closes an email, the malicious ones, it's different. It's not something you would normally see in this country from the person you're talking to. So training is important, helping people learn how to recognize phishing and keeping that regular, right? Testing and training, testing and training, testing and training.
I think Jim has a question.
And along with the training, we find that urgency is always a factor here. It's not Monday at 10 o'clock and you get an email saying, hey, by the end of the week, can you check this out and take a look at our new vendor? It's Friday, it's 4:45, and maybe through other research and social, maybe I posted that I'm on vacation. So it's going to be an email to my treasurer saying, hey, I just hooked up this new deal here, send money, or I met a person who has a great insurance company. Can you please make a PDF of all of our employees' social security numbers and health information that we have and send it over by the end of the day? Because I need this to happen. It's going to save us a lot of money. Or whatever it is. But there's always an urgency involved. And about the opening and closing, I also am on the board for the larger BBB system. And our treasurer got an email from me. I have never, ever signed my email Mr. Temmer, right? It's Jim, or maybe sometimes it's James. And that's what she saw. She said, this didn't look like you because you don't do this. Or, it is different. And just pick up the phone. Pick up the phone and call somebody. That's what you have to do. Or get up, walk down the hall to the office, and if someone's there, ask them. It's the real baseline stuff. And if anything is out of the blue, no one is going to be offended if you call them and say, was that really you?
The only other piece I'd like to add before we get off of this slide is when I said wire transfers, so when we talk about other funds transfer types, is finality of payment. Want to make sure that that's clear when I say that, what that means. Once you send a wire, you cannot get it back. There's no one business day, 24-hour rule. Once you send a wire, it's gone, which is why it's incredibly important that those are triple checked and verified. The account information you're sending it to, domestic and international. You can ask for it back. You can ask to recall your wire transfer. But the receiving party, even if it's an error, does not have to give that money back to you. And there's nothing your bank can do about it. There's nothing the Fed can do about it. If you can find the company who has the money, and if it's still there, you can certainly try to go through the process to sue that company. It's very unlikely that that's going to happen or that the money's still even there. But please know there's no time window. Once it's gone, it's gone. You can try, but that receiving party, even if it was an error, does not have to give those funds back to you.
Okay, our next question is, some cybersecurity incidents require to be reported. For example, customer third-party risk management and some insurance policies. Can you describe situations that are required to report a cybersecurity event for your field?
So I think anytime you have cyber insurance coverage, the absolute first thing you should do, call your insurance provider. Get them involved right away. Because if we start taking actions without involving them, we can end up in a situation where you're not going to be able to get coverage anymore. Right? Preserving evidence, finding out how the compromise happened, these are very important for cyber providers. In addition to that, right, there's a lot of different compliance things that folks may fall under. HIPAA, PCI, DFARS is one that's coming out. This is for the defense industrial base. They all have different reporting requirements. Most of them have a timeline that's associated with it and a guideline on what you need to report or when you need to report. Yeah.
I would like to actually have my own opinion as the first call. From what I do from a financial perspective, your very first call should be the financial institution that you work with, okay? Are they going to freeze your accounts? Quite possibly, okay? They're not going to do it forever, okay? They're going to walk you through this process with your insurance agent. You know, you guys can have communications as to, hey, look, my mortgage is coming out for my building. Okay, they're going to let certain things go through if it's agreed upon, okay? But you don't want to lose any more money if you've already lost some. And even if you're not sure if you've lost some yet, you don't want to lose any in the process, okay? So from my perspective, and I'm sure from Penny's, the first call we want you to make is to your financial institution and say, hey, look, there's a possibility that information has been breached. We don't want to lose funds. So kind of help us walk through this process. Hopefully you'll have a process and you'll know where to go from that, but that would be my perspective, is to make sure that you're contacting them first. The other thing is in addition to those two calls, you really need to have somebody that is familiar with your system as to what type of a hack it is, or what type of a breach it is. And if you yourself are not comfortable with it, you need to have your IT person reaching out to IC3 and making a report. IC3 is the Internet Crime Complaint Center. It's run by federal government agencies, and they track all of the cybersecurity or cyber crimes that occur in the country. So that, in my opinion, would need to be on your top three.
Those are really good additions. That I actually did not think about. There's a couple new ones. You know, the SEC is coming out saying if you're a publicly traded company, they want to be notified within 4 days. There is the Infrastructure Act, which we need to look into to see what those reporting requirements are. I wanted to use this question as an opportunity to say, if you like a law firm that you work with, or if you like a forensics group that you want to work with in the event of a claim, that is a discussion that should take place prior to binding insurance. It's not a discussion you want to have after an event occurs. there are times when we can have your preferred vendors applied to the policy, and they will be the ones to help respond in the event of a loss. But most times, and I've had lots of claims with Beasley, Coalition, Chubb, Travelers, the process when a claim occurs is so efficient, it's scary. Like, they just have it streamlined, it's down, and they already have vendors, legal vendors, where they have already predetermined the billable hour and what payments they're going to make to those vendors. So you could find, if you want to work with your particular vendor of choice, they will only reimburse for the panel rates that they would normally pay their preferred vendors. So report it to us, report it to your broker immediately. And then I had just one situation where I had a client who's just started going gangbusters with their law firm without reporting the claim. And then it got real sticky with the carrier saying, hey, we don't want to reimburse them for all these hours and hours of work they performed. You should have reported it to the carrier in the first place. So I just wanted to add an area of caution. And it's something that is worth talking about with your broker when you're procuring and binding your coverage for cyber.
I think these discussions have all brought up a great point. Have an incident response plan and answer these questions beforehand, right? Because if you ask the IT guy, he's going to give you the computer nerd answer. If you ask the folks specialized in finance, they're going to give you that answer. So work through what you're going to do when something like this happens ahead of time and have that plan. So if it happens, you're prepared. You can go down your list, contact all the folks you need to contact, and in the right order, and make sure that you're not missing any important steps.
And I'm going to reiterate and kind of pull those two items together. Tom said prior. It has to happen prior. That's the incident response plan. Have a roundtable once a year with those trusted partners that are on that incident response plan to make sure we're all on the same page. I feel strongly that once a year, annually, have a roundtable, whether it's a breakfast, a lunch, have your bank pay for it. They'd be happy to. Have your insurance guy there, your IT, your legal, your accounting firm, and your bank all sit down for breakfast or coffee, whatever it may be, once a year. So we're all on the same page. We know who does what protection's in place, who do you call first, why is that? So we're all on the same page as to where you're covered and who those critical key partners are when something like this happens. Once a year, it's worth an hour of your time to have all of those players sit at the table to make sure we're all on the same page. Because I can't tell you how many times from the banking perspectives that our customers think that they have insurance coverage and they don't. Fraud protection coverage, well, what does that mean? That's not cyber protection. What does fraud protection coverage mean? Is that just internal embezzlement? Is it these outbound ACH payments we talked about? It's worth the time and energy, and I've not yet once had one of those trusted vendors in that circle not willing to participate. We're here. You pay all of us to be part of your team, and that's critically important, and I can't imagine that any one of those partners wouldn't participate in a joint discussion like that.
All the information you're hearing today, also try and use in parts of your personal life as well. Maybe you sit on a board of a historical society somewhere, or a small nonprofit, or a church. Those places are targeted, and you should be asking questions of the leadership there. Do we have cybersecurity insurance? Is there directors and officers insurance? What are we doing? Because they have just as much personal information in some of those nonprofits or religious institutions than we do in HR offices. So if you're on a board or you're part of a nonprofit group, raise these questions. The executive director may not be happy with you, but in the long run, they'll be very glad.
And I would add to that, you're going to see financial institutions start to ask about your cyber policies. Just like we're asking about the owners, the guarantors, do they have personal insurance in case they are to die? That's something banks have been required to ask for many years. What you're going to start to see is the banks are now going to start asking about your cyber policy. Because if you have one of these attacks and the cost to your organization could actually inhibit you from being able to pay back your bank loan, these are becoming real scenarios. So it all kind of ties out. We're not regulated to do that yet, but I promise you it's coming, and so banks are starting to get in front of it. So hopefully that's buttoned down already, but if it isn't, know that your banks are going to start to ask for proof of that as well.
Just to add to that, with regards to the incident response plans that hopefully you're creating or you're in the process of working on, please have a paper copy of it, because if you get locked out of your network and all you have is an electronic version, it's not going to do you any good, okay? I know that a lot of people are trying to go paperless, and I understand that. This is one that cannot only be electronic. It has to be on paper so that you have access to it in an emergency. And I would also suggest having one off-site.
All right, next question is, what resources and tools do you use when a cybersecurity incident is reported to you?
I'll start that one off only because I started with the resource already with the IC3. Internet Crime Complaint Center is one that we suggest to people every time we hear the topic. So anytime that there is a financial loss due to some type of a cyber incident, we want you to report it to them. Even if you can't answer all the questions on the form, answer what you can. Because that's the way that the federal government is able to track them and hopefully actually go after these people once they've had enough complaints and they've got enough resources together. And because they are federal, they have global jurisdiction. Okay, so it's not like you're reporting it to your local law enforcement because they can't go to Nigeria or Africa or wherever else if it's something that's not here in the US. The other resource is the NIST, the National Institute of Standards and Technology. It's run by the U.S. Department of Commerce. So it's just www.nist.gov is another great resource, not only for it's not usually used for reporting, it's more used for training. So if you're trying to write that policy, if you're trying to put a plan together, it has a lot of training and opportunities and resources on there, specifically for small businesses, but they have others obviously as well for personal use or boards or nonprofits and such. So those are two great resources you could certainly start with.
Yeah, NIST also publishes a lot of cybersecurity frameworks. NIST CSF 800-53, 800-171. These are guidelines a lot of IT providers use to decide how to secure your organization, and some of them are actually mandated in various regulations, DFARS as an example. For myself, from an IT perspective, we're leaning on technology that helps us figure out what happened. Right? So things like endpoint detection and response, or EDR, SIEM or SIEM, S-I-E-M. These are all about gathering logs and allowing us to look and see, here's how the attacker got in, here's exactly what they did, where they touched, things like that. Insurance is going to ask us for these things, right? Financial institutions are going to ask us for these things. They want to know, okay, so you got compromised, what happened specifically? And if we don't have some of these tools and configurations done ahead of time, you're not going to have that information. So it's important to get that stuff in now before an attack happens, right? And then some of that technology also allows us to respond to that attack and stop it in its tracks.
So Jason's answer is Jason is like, he works with one of my clients and he does a phenomenal job. And so I feel like we're in one of these conversations with an insurance carrier right now. So, okay, so for starters, you're probably paying 10 to 15% of the premium you pay comes to us. It comes to your insurance broker. So you deserve resources and you deserve hand-holding throughout this process. It's the most volatile line of insurance out there right now. So probably one of the first things you'll see from carriers these days is they're going to run non-invasive scans of your domains. Basically, it's like they're walking through a neighborhood, seeing who has the unlocked door and where can they break in the most easily. You're going to get a report. It's going to kind of grade you on maybe 5 to 10 different categories, and then they're going to say, hey, we're not going to insure them unless they fix X, Y, and Z. And that's where Jason and USI kind of help you figure out what the plan of attack is going to be. And you have to start, this process early. Because a couple of years ago, when everyone was scrambling to implement MFA, that takes time. So that's very key. As a resource, we can coordinate calls with the insurance carrier and ask them any question we want. So a lot of the carriers call these people cyber success consultants, and really they are really there to help you Because you may do something in your IT infrastructure, you may do something differently, and we just need to explain how you're achieving the same outcome by doing something differently, and that's really important. You may not know how do you pick a limit for cyber insurance? Have you seen any benchmarking data? We have data that takes your SIC code, your peer group, your revenues, how many records you have, and we can do a breach calculator to help you determine how do we pick a limit in the first place. We have partnerships with vendors like SWICKtech. We do have templates for incident response and disaster management that are readily available and free to you. And I think a risk assessment's critically important as well. And the easiest way to do a risk assessment is simply to take an application. I prefer Beasley's application and their ransomware supplement. So I'll ask my clients to say, hey, 6 months before the renewal, why don't you complete this application? I'll have one of our 60 cyber folks on staff review it for things that clearly stand out. This year they don't have endpoint detection and response. Last year was MFA. I have a whole list of the 10 most critical controls that are going to be required moving into Q4 here. So those are the conversations you need to have early on in the process to make sure it's not a total headache for you, and also so you get the best premiums and the lowest retentions at renewal time.
I just wanted to add a couple of different things here that they had reached out on. So a couple of things. First of all, and I know Jason keeps pointing at me. He says, "Well, from financial institutions." I'm not from a financial institution. I'm from the district attorney's office. So, but my point is I do a lot with financials, and the reason I think that that's really important is because all of these things that you're working with, your vendors, right? So in this case, SWICKtech or your insurance company. All those reports, all those things that say, how did this happen? How did this person get in? Whatever. You need to be keeping copies of that report because eventually, especially if it's a domestic scammer or hacker or what have you, you need to be reporting that to your local law enforcement as well, right? And that's why we need to have access to those reports as well because we want to know how did it occur? Because if we're going to file criminal charges at a state level, we're going to need to bring them in as witnesses, right, to be able to explain what they've told you. Same with your insurance company. If you make a claim to your insurance company for $1 amount, but you're making a claim for as a restitution claim for a different amount, we need to know why, right? So is there something else? Maybe you're only making a claim to your insurance company for a $1 amount because that was your limit, but you actually lost more than that. You know what I mean? So there's different aspects, but you need to be keeping all of those records and all of those reports because when and hopefully you do report it to law enforcement, we can utilize that information for the criminal prosecution if it's somebody that's local. Obviously, you still need those reports if you're going to report it federally because that's a different process through the federal regulations, but we want you to be able to provide all of that. We want you to be able to give us the contact information for your vendors because we're going to reach out to them as well in that part of that criminal investigation. So I just want to make sure we mention that. The other piece is the MFA, the multi-factor authentication, is to be aware of, and it was huge, and it still is huge for some that have not yet implemented it, but we want you to realize that the scammers and the fraudsters that are out there and the people that are manipulating our businesses and our different things in our personal lives, they're already finding ways around MFA. Okay, we've already been made aware of cases where the fraudster, forgive me for lack of a better term, but that's what how we term them a lot of times is like they're actually redirecting your business calls. So you can still make outbound calls, but they've redirected your inbound calls. So if somebody's trying to set up or they've got information where they're trying to get an MFA, they're already getting the call giving you that security code if you've done it by phone. Okay, so you need to realize that there's ways around it, and the scammers realize that, or the fraudsters know that. So you need to be aware of, how do we deal with that, and making sure that those are things that we're looking at as well.
So our next question is, describe what happens with a situation of business email compromise for those outside your company and how it affects you. For vendors, contractors, suppliers that get compromised, how does that affect an organization and how can we avoid these effects?
I think we've covered business email compromise pretty well, but So we have 6 attorneys on staff, and a lot of what we do as well is contract review. So I just had a claim where my client makes printed circuit boards internationally, and they have an e-commerce website that was hosted, and there was a ransomware attack on the hosting company, and they were down. And so my client sustained a substantial loss of business income, and we're in the process of formulating, the time that goes into creating the claim itself, plus the lost income, even as so far as a result of being down, their Google page ranking they've gone to the second page, right? So that impacts who's going to be, clicking on their link. Even that was a component of the business interruption and the financial loss. So one of the things that the carrier wants my client to do is kind of just evaluate what were the lessons learned as a result of this event. What can you do when it's a third party that has the event that is substantially impactful to your organization? And so I think contract review is a core component, and we do that for our clients if you want some. But oftentimes what we see in the contract is that the third party is only liable to indemnify you for the amount of what you pay with that particular vendor. So there's maybe not a whole lot you can do, but it's something I feel companies should be aware of, what's in your contracts with these third parties that you're heavily reliant upon.
And I know I've touched on a number of these things around business email compromise, but really go back to your organization and find out who's in charge of those internal policies and procedures around who can approve these types of things when you're making changes to these vendor records. I work with our customers all the time, and there's a lot of layers here. Typically, if you're not using a bank product, and there's so many fintechs in this arena now with payable products where you're building out your vendors, when you talk about all these integrated payment solutions, oftentimes now they're not being delivered by your financial institution, but being delivered by a fintech. And you don't have a token required to sign in. And you're building a payment portal with a fintech that's not regulated the way your financial institution is. Be very careful that the policies and procedures you have internally and that somebody's checking and verifying who can do what with what systems and where is the MFA in place. How many layers are there? What are those layers? I can't tell you how often we're working with customers on the payment side and we're looking at their tools they're using. Small businesses especially, and Bill.com is huge. People are using it because it's integrated with QuickBooks. Look at the lack of features around those products and the kind of information that's in there and how much a user in your organization can change this information that we're talking about that could have been compromised by the business email compromise was the source. There's a lot of layers here that you have to peel back. But what we're telling you is when you look at the people at this table, they're talking about free resources and tools. Don't recreate the wheel. These risk assessments, all of the things that we have are at no cost to you. At least you can use it as your basis internally to start to build out those processes, plans, procedures around these things, all the way down when he talks about at the Better Business Bureau, people not attending these seminars. We have the tools, and they don't cost you anything more than you're already paying your partners, right? You got to utilize them. You really do. And it's a huge undertaking. It has to be done. It really does.
How this affects an organization. We talk a lot about the people, right? I mean, phishing scams can get by some IT, but you always have the human element you have to deal with. And after what we find businesses fall to any of these scams, you find people that are ashamed, people that are guilty, people that are victimized. Work productivity drops. Everyone is questioning everyone in the office. Well, who let them in? Who did this? Who did that? And it can really hurt a company culture. It can kind of start tearing it apart. So there's a lot of human costs involved in this as well, which if you talk to anybody who's gone through it, I mean, it's horrible. They may have lost money, and I wonder how many things where it is maybe just personal information or something are not even reported because businesses don't want anyone else to know that this happened. Maybe it'll get out that their customer list got out. Like embezzlement. I mean, talk to any banker, how many firms have embezzlement going on, but boy, they aren't going to tell anyone. So we have to take the stigma of all of this stuff away too. And again, the more people are educated, the more they're going to understand it and hopefully get involved with cybersecurity and not just blame the people next to them.
One thing I'd just like to add quick is that you also need to have your policies in place so that maybe a newer employee or a younger employee who's not as familiar with the process doesn't take it upon themselves. Like if they make an error and they're afraid of losing their job, right? So they realize that, hey, look, I send this out and it didn't go to the right person, so I'm just going to pay it personally. I've actually seen that. We've had cases where that's happened. So now not only is the business out because it was based on a business email compromise, but now your personal employee is now out funds because they tried to make it right without going through the right process within your business, because they thought it was saving you or saving their job or what have you. And first of all, your employees shouldn't be responsible for those types of things, but it happens, right? So you want to make sure that everybody's in the know and there's a process in place and everybody understands what that looks like.
I think I'd like to just take the opportunity, when we're talking about ways we can avoid these effects, you brought up some of the changes with MFA recently, and I'd like to elaborate on them just a little bit. The two big ones that people are getting around right now are voice and SMS, right? So getting a phone call and either saying yes or hitting a number, or an SMS text message with a 6-digit number you have to type in. The voice ones, right? They call you in the middle of the night. Maybe you answer that half asleep and you say yes or hit one or something like that. We've seen that happen. We recommend you don't use it. And for SMS, SIM hijacking, cell phone cloning, you may have heard of it. It's actually not all that difficult for somebody to call your cell phone provider, convince them that they're you, and get complete control of your cell phone, get all your text messages, things like that. So we're seeing a change in what you should use for MFA and some of the requirements that come with it. Numbers matching MFA is sort of the big change right now. So if you're going to use MFA, anything is better than nothing. But either like an app notification on like Microsoft Authenticator or Duo, or like a YubiKey, which is a little like USB key you just touch. Or a token like you've probably gotten from your bank before, or a little rotating 6-digit token. Those are all a lot harder to get around because they can't get that information as easily from you. With the app notifications, same sort of thing. We're seeing people just kind of approve them blindly without thinking about if it was actually them or not. So the change there with numbers matching is now you get the approval notification, but you have to type. Usually it's a 2 to 4-digit number that the login prompt showed you. So you can't just, absent-mindedly approve that anymore. You need to see that number, right, know that number, and then type it in. In addition to that, right, on your Microsoft 365 or similar technologies, your provider has to make sure that MFA is actually required for all the logins. It's not out of the box, even if you just turn it on. There are other things still turned on that you can use to just go around the MFA requirement entirely. So making sure that those avenues aren't available.
And from a financial institution perspective, you've got to verify these things are actually in place. Banks waive the requirements. You're owning all the risk and liability if you're asking your bank to waive it, but sometimes they do. They waive dual control requirements. They waive token requirements. So it's very important that you go in and test some of these things to make sure all of your users who have access, first check with your bank, who are they? Are they active? And then with each of those active users, you need to sit down and watch their process to see what tokens, what authentications are actually using when they're logging in, and where are they using them and when. It's one thing to use this type of token when I log in. Do I have to use it again when I send out a wire? Do I have another? Because what if I'm actively in the system working, and then I go in to do a wire and I'm not prompted for another layer then? You're exposed and at risk if I'm only using it when I log in one time and I'm sending a payment out and it's 20 minutes later. You've got to kind of see how this experience works for each of your users that have access, especially for payments. When is it required? Was it waived? Is it being used? If dual control is in place and I'm acting as two users, this happens all the time. I'm logging with my credentials plus my boss's credentials, all from the same device. Well, what have I done? Well, you might as well waive dual control if you're going to do that. It doesn't really make any sense. All the layers certainly help, but these users are negating all of these steps that we try to put in place for a real reason. But you've got to test it and know what's actually being done, where it's being done, because did your bank waive it? Who approved that? And know that you own 100% of the risk and liability when you waive those things, when those best practices by bank are put in place and you choose not to use them. It could also then compromise your ability to utilize your insurance protection if they find out you've waived all these things. So it's important you got to really test these procedures. And April's right. Your financial institution needs to be notified immediately when these things happen, and we're probably going to lock you down immediately, and it's frustrating. And we don't do it to make it difficult. If you saw what we saw every day and the losses that happen and the amount of time and energy spent on it, you would 100% understand. And to your point, we're going to want to see what your IT folks looked at, because not all of them are at the caliber of a SWICKtech. Not all of them are looking at the same thing. And if you just tell me your IT professional looked at it and we're all good, that's not enough. I need to know exactly what they looked at before I unlock you. I can help you do manual payments, what we need to do internally in the interim, but it's critical that we have to lock you down until we have proof of what was actually looked at.
All right, next question. How can compliance drive cybersecurity, and what is the relationship between the two?
So I think, compliance-wise, each business is a little bit different, and I've kind of mentioned some of these before, right? PCI is an example. There's a lot of other regulations that your business might fall under, and most of them have cybersecurity requirements. So they help drive adoption of cybersecurity, and as well as, right, insurance providers. Now we're seeing it from banks. I'm sure we're going to see something on the law enforcement side soon. That's all driving the conversation and moving it forward, right? It's certainly changed the conversation for us. It's a lot easier to have cybersecurity discussions now that some of the other organizations you're working with are asking these questions, right? And so that's kind of constantly evolving and changing and keeping us up to date. It's not just you've got to implement these couple things and that's it, right? The controls are changing and they're going to continue to change. So it kind of keeps us honest and makes us adapt and grow and evolve.
Over the summers when I was in college, I worked at a metal shop, and it was piecework. And there was one piece of equipment I remember I had to work on, and the guy showing me how to do it said, well, you take the safety thing here and you just remove it, because then you're going to be able to work faster. So this is kind of the same thing, with compliance. You can do it from a corporate level, but when it gets down to everyday everybody, you're going to find someone trying to put in two different sets of authentication from the same device. You're going to find someone who never logs out of a machine because it's easier and it might save them 2 minutes on the other end. So compliance on the top level, you can say my company is doing all these things, but who's really following up? Where does it go down and where does it stop? And it's got to be from top management, middle management, all the way through, or else you're going to have those safety guards just thrown away because people want to work faster.
So something to add on the compliance side that you touched on, right? It's verifying that the controls you say you have in place are actually in place. And we're starting to see this with some of the compliance stuff. For us, it's a lot on the defense industrial base side, where they're now saying you can't just say, hey, we meet all these 110 controls. Somebody's going to have to come in and verify that you meet those controls. And I think we're going to see more of that, where your business and even your IT provider can't necessarily say, yeah, no, they're good, we're good, trust us. Somebody's going to have to come in and actually assess that you're meeting these controls. And that changes things quite a bit, because it makes people hesitate when they answer a question that maybe they're not sure about. And it verifies that you really are protected as well as you think you are.
And I can promise you the best written policies and procedures are in place, and oftentimes they're simply not being tested, or the frequency that they're being tested is not enough. So I'm not an IT person, right? I run a treasury management, cash management department for a financial institution. I spent my entire career doing this. And I would say over the past 15 years of my 30-year career, much of what I do is focused around fraud. That didn't used to be the case. The majority of what I do is focused around fraud mitigation, and helping not only the financial institution itself navigate the risk, but our customers navigate their risk. One of the things just this week at our bank, we deploy RDC, remote deposit check scanners for customers, right? And this has been my entire career so check scanners have been out since 9/11, right? 9/11 is what caused imaging to be allowed in our country, because checks sat on the bellies of airplanes, right? And we had to make that stop. So we let everybody scan their checks. It's amazing to me when we send out emails, when something has to be upgraded regarding scanner, the network needs to be upgraded, the device controls all have to be upgraded. We make sure we force our customers to go through that process to keep it as safe as possible. We send out communications not to IT teams, to online banking users. And we send out saying, make sure you have admin rights, because none of this is going to work unless you have admin rights. Guess what? 90% of those online banking users have admin rights. That you are giving fraudsters the keys to the castle. And I can tell you, when we ask to review their policies say none of the banking users have admin rights. They all do. I can go in there, banker, and install hardware on an employee's computer without needing a single IT person to touch it, look at, and we won't do it, then they get frustrated. Well, guess what? A lot of banks will do it, and you don't know what I'm doing. I probably don't know what I'm doing. I'm not an IT representative, and I'm going to deactivate all these ActiveX controls that I know nothing about. And when I leave, did I put it back the way it was supposed to be? This is real. This is every day that we experience as a financial institution helping our customers. And we can have even one of our third parties remote into your employee's computer without anyone else knowing. How is this possible? And we raise our hand saying, are you sure you don't need an IT guy to come and watch this process or have admin rights? No. You have no idea what you're allowing in and what that employee is. This is 90% of the time. I would say very seldom do we stumble on a roadblock. That roadblock should be there every single time. It's in your policy. But if you're not checking, and how does it happen? I can't answer that, but your audit should look at it and answer, how do those controls get removed and not put back in place because your policy says they're there?
I just have two thoughts here. So I think it was last month, and it's public. So Travelers declined a cyber claim because it was attested to on the application by, I think it was the CFO, that they had MFA implemented. But like, what does that really mean? Because you can implement MFA on a variety of things, whether it's privilege access, corporate email, access to web email. But what about the guys and gals on the shop floor that are accessing a computer tied to the internet because they need instructions on how to operate the equipment? And then there's a breach, and then it gets in there, and then it churns that $2 million laser into a brick. So I just want to be very clear that make sure you understand what the applications are really asking, and when you attest to those controls, make sure they're really in place, and work with your broker to really understand those questions. I saw another decline claim from CNA as well, so it's not like Travelers is the only one doing this, and I think that's pretty fair. The other thing too, so we talked about compliance. If you're doing an audit that shows you're best in class and you have ultra controls beyond the norm, share that with the, so when we procure cyber insurance, we ask you to do an application and we will walk you through it. Share that information, open up a separate Word doc, share an audit. There's not really good transparency into cyber premium pricing. Like, we know for work comp, it's based off your payrolls. We know for general liability, it's based off your sales. We don't really know how your cyber premiums are calculated. It's a variety of controls that you have in place, revenues, how many pieces of PII or PHI you have. It's kind of a mystery. So the more you can support the narrative that you're best in class, you need to give that to your broker, and it's only going to make your renewal better. So that was one thing that came up with the compliance.
Yeah, those are all fantastic. One comment that I would have on the compliance side of things, and it's obviously there's formal compliance and different frameworks that are available, but another huge driver that we're seeing is the amount of customers that are having a 5 to 10 question questionnaire around what cyber policies, procedures, and systems that you have in place, and they want to answer those. They want to see those answers before doing business with you. So businesses are actually starting to hold each other accountable because they know that once you start conducting business, that's an additional attack vector that you're opening yourself up to. So they're actually pushing some of these cybersecurity efforts forward. So we are getting a little bit short on time. I would like to get to the focused questions at this time, so I'm going to skip through a couple of questions to get to the ones that are dedicated for the panelists, and then we're going to do a brief Q&A. And if there's no questions or anything like that from the audience, we can come back to the questions that we're moving past here. Okay, our first question is going to be for Penny. How common are business email compromise scams, and are small businesses targeted? I feel like we've covered this a little bit today.
Yeah, we've covered it a lot today, and I think the percentages that you saw at the beginning, the higher or lower, it absolutely mirrors what we're seeing in financial institutions, and not just for Signature Bank. I'm a certified treasury professional, and certainly all financial institutions are seeing the same things, and these compromises are moving down to small businesses and the nonprofits that you serve at. So use those recommendations, go back not just in your day-to-day job, but make sure you're taking that back to the organizations where you're volunteering or you're on a board or on a committee to make sure that these things are coming with you and you're sharing with your organization, because it's very high. Are we seeing them declining? Absolutely, but those numbers, as you saw, are still very large, and as much as we try to educate, continue to do it. Make sure you re-educate all of your employees. Use SWICKtech and their resources, or whoever your IT partner is, to test those employees over and over again. So it's top of mind. I work for a financial institution. We're heavily compliance driven. We are tested constantly, and our jobs are at risk every single time, and we know that. And it's not to threaten employees. These behaviors are not something that can be compromised.
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks, Penny. Next question is going to be for Jim. What are the current market conditions for cyber insurance, and what are the best practices for insurance procurement? That is for you. I apologize. That was mislabeled. I thought that was an odd question for Jim.
You want to take that one? I'm thinking through some of the most recent. So the market's softening. There are more carriers that have entered the space and kind of know what they're doing, and they know, of course, the frequency and severity of claims is still occurring, but I feel like underwriters understand what controls need to be in place to mitigate rising premiums. We are still seeing, so last year I would go out to clients and say, hey, anywhere from a 30 to a 300% increase. I'm not really dialing it in for the client when I say something like that. I think it's improved this year, although it's still kind of a wild card. I just placed for a publicly traded company about $1 billion in revenue. The underwriter told me they want $35,000 per $1 million limit. Okay, that's a lot of money. I have a client that distributes packaging at food restaurants, 20 branch locations, $750 million in sales. They're paying about $100,000. I have a foundry, about $25 million in revenue. They're paying about $9,000. I have an at-risk youth nonprofit. They pay $7,400. It's all over the place. It's very difficult for me to go in and say, hey, this is what I think your renewal is going to be. I would say if a client really pressed me, I would say, and I had some flight renewals this year too, but it's probably at a minimum going to be a 15% rate increase on the cyber insurance. But the carriers are also pushing for higher retentions. So they want you to self-insure more of the risk than what they were in the past year. There's a best practice for this. You should not be doing an application alone or without oversight. So myself and Carla Borda, if you want, there's 2 ways to do it. You do the application first. We'll review it, and we'll identify where we know the underwriter is going to take issue. Or we can walk through the application with you and do it together. We'd like to open up a separate Word document and say, hey, the applications allow for yes and no answers and sometimes drop downs for the software provider that you're using as a control. Well, maybe you're not using one of those providers, or maybe you answered no for a particular very good reason. We have to outline those things and add supplementary information to support our efforts to go battle with the underwriter to get you the best deal possible. Your cyber needs to be marketed every year also. It's not like your property and your work comp. You don't need to market those things every single year. Cyber needs to be marketed every year because new companies are coming in and out, and there's new coverages available, and there's different resources available. So, yeah, you can't be with a generalist broker on cyber, someone that does that. You really need to work with a specialist, and I think that's my key point today is no matter who your broker is, big or small, work with somebody who's really good at cyber because this is very expensive, and will help you.
Thank you. All right, next question is for April. How is Waukesha County District Attorney's Office preparing to assist in the prosecution of cyber-related crimes?
Well, what we've done here in Waukesha County is we actually applied for a federal grant, one of 16 in the country, to bring in what they call a smart prosecution grant, which is cyber-related. So we were actually very fortunate to be one of the 16 that were chosen nationwide. And so we actually did is we brought in a team. So we actually, I brought my cyber prosecutor with. Her name's Alyssa, sorry. And so we actually wrote a grant that would provide for not only a prosecutor specific to cyber-related crimes, but we also brought in some other staff to help assist her in the discovery process and software, hardware, all of that type of thing. So we are working the best that we can. We're providing training both locally here as well as out of state to the staff of that team. And we hope to be able to grow that team once the grant funds run out, because it is a short-term grant. But what we're doing is we are trying our best to make sure that we have the resources and the ability to provide those trainings and then share those trainings with other prosecutors in our office as well, so that we can collect the data necessary and talk to the right people, the financial institutions, the insurance companies, and your vendors, so that we can prosecute these. Because part of what our issue is that when we're going through the criminal investigation, if these cases are going to go to trial, we need people to come in and be willing to testify, right? And so that's part of the issue. And as long as you have all these people on board, and like we talked about earlier, Penny had alluded to it, is having everybody at the table once a year. You know who these people are. You know that you can count on them. We're hoping that if something is to occur, that we can also rely on them through the investigation. And so we are doing our best to make sure people are aware of the fact that we are here and we are willing to help assist in these prosecutions if they're brought to us, which is a part of, in your policy, why we need you to report it, right? We need you to report it to IC3. We need you to report it to law enforcement. We see a lot of businesses who become victims of cyber-related incidents and they don't report it because they don't want the bad publicity. Well, if you don't report it, that person's just going to go and do it to someone else. And so we need to find a way to stop that. And part of that is through the education and making sure that you guys are aware that we are here, we're here to help, and that we need you to be reporting it. And understand it's going to be a long process. The judicial system is not a quick process, right? You're going to have to go through law enforcement. You're going to have to go through the district attorney's office if it's referred in for charges and all of that. And it's, 18 months, 2 years, 3 years, depending on the process. It's a long time. But we need you to be there with us. We need you to be reporting it and walking through that. And we will do our best to help answer the questions along the way. But really, that's the only way to stop what's occurring. And not that we could ever really stop it, because they're very much, we change something to try to make it better, and they're right behind us, and they're sometimes in front of us, actually. But we can at least try to slow the process. And we want you to know that here locally, we are doing our best to actually prosecute these types of crimes that are being reported, that are being brought to our attention.
Thanks, April. I apologize to Jim and Penny as those questions got flipped there. But Jim, from your perspective, how common are business email compromise scams, and how are small businesses targeted?
Well, again, we don't have to go into depth in this, but a few stats to point out. 80% of all businesses received at least one business email compromise attempt in the last year. 80%, so almost all businesses. And other than the normal ones we've talked about, CEO to CFO or vendors, I think briefly we may have talked about this, direct deposits. I was in La Crosse talking to a business owner, a small shop, less than 5 people. He was out of the office all the time. Their office administrator, secretary, passed him in the hall one day and said, "Oh, I'm sorry, I didn't process your direct payment change. I'll get that next payroll period." And he said, "What are you talking about?" She said, "Well, you said you changed bank accounts and you sent me a copy of your new canceled check." He never did it. Small company outside of La Crosse, Wisconsin, probably a town of 500 people. This stuff happens to everybody all the time. Billions. During the pandemic, phishing attacks rose 350%, and these scammers generated over $1 trillion more than Walmart makes. So this is big business. This is why they're ahead of the game, because they pay for it, because it's worth it. They try and scam 1 million businesses, and if they get 0.5%, there's your trillions of dollars. This is incessant. It's everywhere. And sometimes we say words like scammers or fraudsters. They're out and out criminals, and they're stealing money, and they're keeping it out of the legitimate economy. I won't go through all the rest of this, but same stuff.
No, I appreciate it, Jim. All right, and our last question is for Jason. What's changed in 2022 versus 2021 from an IT and cybersecurity perspective?
I think we've covered a lot of it, right? What kinds of attacks we're seeing are changing, right? We're not seeing as much ransomware anymore. The ransomware we do see is not just pay us money to get your files back, it's pay us money to get your files back, and also we stole every piece of data in your network, and if you don't pay us, we're going to release it to the world, which has definitely increased how much they get paid. Business email compromise, like we've said, I think we've beat it to death, is on the rise. But some of the things that are changing for us is a lot of the compliance stuff we're talking about, a lot of the requirements that are coming from various organizations, driving an adoption of cybersecurity controls. So while some of those attacks are going down, others are going up. So we're seeing higher complexity attacks, right? The attackers are evolving. And, I think for some people, they think of these criminals as, nerds in hoodies in dark rooms like myself, but it's just not true. They're highly complex. They're organized businesses. In a ransomware situation, they have a help desk that is as good as ours, if not better, right? Like they are very organized. They're a legitimate business where they're operating out of. So we have to change and grow in that way. Right now, your people are a big weakness, and please don't take that as the nerd that doesn't like people or anything like that. Training them is important to help them recognize phishing emails and things like that. Extending some of these requirements out to your partners, your vendors, is important. Making sure a lot of the controls we're talking about are in place to help reduce these sorts of attacks. Changing some of the MFA stuff we talked about, right? Complexity is kind of going up and down, right? As more companies adopt these cybersecurity controls, there's going to be people that are behind the curve, and they're going to become the low-hanging fruit. So don't be behind the curve. In addition, right, some complexity also going up. Some things that a lot of providers aren't thinking about, a lot of little holes that most people don't even know exists, they're getting abused. So working with somebody who's looking out for those things, and the controls are changing again to adopt to them, it can be very hard to keep up with them, because the truth is they're watching these talks and seeing what we're doing to respond and defend and adapting as best they can.
For the record, I think that our help desk is better than the ransomware help desks, but other than that, I agree.
I got to tell you, the first time I called one, blew me away.
Sure, absolutely. All right, just some closing thoughts here. If you could make 1 to 2 recommendations to any of the organizations here to help limit risk and increase security, their security posture, what would they be? We could go down the line.
So this is sort of my Bible for cybersecurity, and this is a rolling document, ever evolving. Every quarter, the cyber carriers kind of say, "Hey, this is what we're focused on. We feel like we have MFA under control, but what about privilege? Like a PAM tool, privilege access management tool. What about endpoint detection and response? What about the end of life software? How are you keeping the controls on that? You talked about DKIM with email security. I have the top 10 things that underwriters are wanting to make sure your programs have in place, and it's only going to help you reduce your premiums moving forward. So I'll share this with SWICKtech, and if you want to reach out to me directly, I'm happy to share that with you. I usually send it out to my clients 6 months in advance so they can just start kind of wrapping their head around it, and then usually they have questions, and we'll walk them through kind of what they have to do. MFA was sort of a, if you don't have it, you're not getting insurance. These are a little bit lighter than that. These are just strongly recommended to obtain the best terms and conditions at your renewal. So this is a little bit better. And I will say, back before MFA was huge, the way we used to write cyber insurance was I took your SIC code or your revenue and I hit submit and it printed a premium and then all the coverages. And it hasn't been that way for 6 years. But there is still one carrier out there that if you are a company that does less than $25 million in revenue and you really don't have MFA or a lot of controls in place, you can still get $1 million policy for extortion, breaches. That's not that expensive, which is surprising to me. I don't know how long this carrier will be around, but if you're in a pinch and you need a stopgap, there is an option for you. So again, yeah, if you want a copy of this, I'm happy to share it with you. It's pretty powerful.
So I think we mentioned a number of the best practices I would consider being the things you need to implement, having those team meetings with your trusted vendors and partners, evaluating those partners. You hear April mention the bank a lot. You hear me mention your insurance partners a lot. I can't tell you as a banker how important it is to evaluate those partners and the quality of your partners. If you're asking me, your banker, to review your insurance policy, there's a problem, and you might need to look at who your partners are. I am looking at more insurance policies. I am not an insurance expert. I'm a payment. It's not you. That's what I'm saying. Evaluate your partners. And I'm not paid by anyone on this panel. We don't get referral fees from each other. We're really not linked together like that at all. It's what we're seeing every day. Evaluate your partners, because if you're asking your banker to review your insurance policies on fraud and risk and cyber, which I'm asked to look at all of the time, you have the wrong partner. So make sure you look at those things. It's critically important that you evaluate that and know what protections and coverages you have. April mentioned positive pay. It's a bank product to help get in front of unauthorized and fraudulent payments. ACH and checks are still the biggest forms of payments now because ACH has surpassed wire transfers. Positive pay protects and helps put this layer of security. Every financial institution offers it. The product's been around for 30 years. It's still underutilized. Only 25% of businesses in this country, especially small and medium-sized businesses and nonprofits, are using this product. So it's very underutilized. It's critically important, not just the cyber things we're talking about, but I'll go back when April was talking about mail fraud. It's a significant piece of what's happening today, and you can't dismiss that in this whole arena. And it's not just I put a flag up on my mailbox anymore. They're beating up postal workers. They're stealing master keys. We used to say, make sure you don't put your mail outside anymore. Take it to the post office. You can't just take it to the post office. You have to take it inside the post office. They're compromising the blue bins that are in the post office parking lot. It is that bad. And so we used to always say the recommendation was make sure you have positive pay on with your financial institution. It's now more than that. We're recommending you outsource your payments. Your AP department is the biggest target. If you look at every percentage and statistics out there, your AP department is the biggest target of business email compromise in any other part of your organization. So educate those employees on expectations, security expectations, IT expectations. Focus in on that group, re-educate, verify and check, because they're the biggest target for a reason. They control the payments. And it's not so much just add positive pay anymore, outsource it. Outsource it to a bank partner or a trusted financial partner that's gonna get these checks out of the mail, start doing things on virtual card payments, and if and when it's ACH, to put a really secure structure around that, around when you can change the data, how you can originate these payments. It's absolutely critical. You aren't meant to be this expert in this room in your organization, which is why you invite these partners to the table to get that done.
So hard to pick one or two. I can't do it. I'm going to give you like 50. No, I'm just kidding. So I think from my perspective, having a good cyber insurance provider, adopting these financial controls, those two things are very important. And along those lines, getting an IT provider that focuses on cybersecurity is important for you. The right one is not going to have one or two controls for you. They're going to have a full agreement for you that adds a lot of layers of protection, because that's what we need, layers of protection. One thing here, one thing there isn't really going to cut it anymore. And that provider is going to stay ahead of the curve with you, right? They're going to be watching for the changes at every institution and helping you adapt to them with your technology. And be a partner, right? They're going to have these discussions with you, not just send you a bill and do a bunch of IT stuff behind the scenes.
Well, I was going to give you two, and Penny took one of them, so which is great. Positive pay is definitely an issue that I think is very underutilized by small businesses, so please yield her advice and work on that if you're not already, and outsource if you can. But the other piece that we want to look at is the policy development, the practice, and how you enforce it, okay? And the policy is not just your cyber policy. It's also your wire transfers. It's also your chain of command within your organization, so people know if something happens or something comes through email or some other fashion, they know who to go to ask. And those policies, when you create them, shouldn't just be, oh, here's a policy, you should maybe read it sometime, okay? It's a policy that you need to require that they read and sign off on annually, because truthfully, if you do have an internal attack, we're going to use that policy guide that they signed off on every year as evidence. And we need that. We need to know that when you changed your policy for what they could use their company debit card for, that they were aware of it, okay? Or who had the authority to do what when they logged into your AP system. So we want to know that they had actual knowledge of what they could and could not do, because we are going to use that later as evidence. And if you indicate, oh yeah, they signed it 20 years ago when they started, but we've updated it 15 times since then, I can't prove, or our office can't prove, that they actually had the knowledge of what they could and could not do. So having the policy developed, having it practiced and enforced, meaning if you do have a partner that you work with that maybe sends out fraudulent emails as a test to see whether or not people are clicking on them or not, those are important. And we want to know about those, okay? So that's all going to be part of your policy and part of your partnerships that you're going to work on. So I think that really is the clear way to do it, because you want to, as Jason had indicated, you want those layers of security, right? And you want to be able to show us what those layers are and not try to scramble and figure out what they were or what they weren't after something has occurred. You want to do that on the front end. You want to know what to do and when to do it and how to do it and who's going to be responsible for doing what. And that really comes from pre-planning.
Two things, one easy, one hard. First one, we didn't really mention today, but work from home. After the pandemic, everyone has employees working from home. What about the security on their networks? What are your policies? Double check them. Check with your IT people. What can you do to strengthen that? Because again, you're only as strong as your weakest link. And if you got somebody whose kid is using their computer for something, you never know unless you know. The other one is larger but more long-term, and that's budget. I'm old enough where I've seen my IT cost center grow tremendously over the past 20 years or so. This isn't something to skimp on. It's something you budget for, and you don't go with the lowest common denominator. You don't go with what can just get by, because it won't get by. You got to pay for it. And you've got to work with people you trust, people you know, and people that are going to do a job for you. Because if you think you can skimp there and put it somewhere else, you're going to end up paying more in the long run.
Thank you. Just a quick kind of bringing some of that together from SWICKtech's perspective. Obviously, our focus is on cybersecurity, IT, and compliance. We have many agreements and solutions that we can help businesses identify some of these risks and implement mitigation strategies. So if you're interested, several of our team members are here today. Please feel free to stick around and ask any questions, and we'd be happy to help. With that, we're going to open up for a couple minutes for any questions from the audience.
You guys said a lot of interesting things. One of the ones that jumped off the page was, Jason, when you had mentioned you said you called one of their help centers and you were blown away the first time. You have to expand upon that. What do you mean they... Describe to me these organizations and how they look in your mind, because I have no idea. I assumed that it was what you had mentioned, that it's a guy that figured, some guy somewhere. I mean, with the internet, everyone, you're as close to Thailand as you are to Milwaukee, so I figured it was some guy somewhere just figuring it out. That sounds like they're basically corporations, though.
That's exactly right. Many of the large ones out there, they are structured like a corporation. They're not small. It's not one shady guy in a basement or a couple shady guys in a basement. It is a large organization with an entire help desk structure, an entire team of people whose job it is to take these initial compromises and break into your network. Right? I've encountered them in the wild, in the middle of an attack while we're trying to stop them. So yeah, they're very high complexity. You call these help desks where, right, when I say help desk, their job is more or less, I've paid my ransom, they're gonna help you get all your files back, right? And you get people that, they're native speakers, they're very well spoken, they're very polite. You hit a queue, but you don't wait very long. It's not a couple guys. It's a full-on business in some of the areas that these folks operate out of.
Where is this happening? Like, I don't understand how you can have a building this is basically like organized crime. I don't understand how this is happening.
I'll let you answer that so I don't get too political.
No worries. So first of all, the one that you're referring to, and it is very much organized crime, first of all. And where they're doing it as a business typically is overseas, but you have to understand they have domestic partners here. And they have those people that are overseas that travel here to complete some of the transactions or to be a part of that ring in some fashion. And so when they're doing it overseas, that's their job. They literally get paid to sit in a building 8, 12, 15 hours a day and scam people from the US. Like, that's their job. And in their country, it's legal. But what we then also have here is we have some of those people or people connected to those people in some fashion who are now traveling to the United States and opening fake business accounts here so that those monies can be deposited locally so it looks like it's legitimate, right? Because, they've got a bank account in Northern Illinois. Well, that's not that far from where we're at. Right, but he used a Venezuelan passport to open the account. And he also has a fake driver's license from Florida or North Carolina or wherever else, because that's part of the ring, right? So not all of the people in the ring are necessarily financial or cyber criminals. Some of them are great at making fake identifications or great at, going in and speaking very fluent English and being able to present as a business person that has this great business that they've registered online legally in whatever state it is, and they're all working together.
So I have a slide here. It's basically 28 organized crime groups from Lockbit. They basically all sound like the names of rock bands. The help desks that we have encountered have been simply, if they want X amount of Bitcoin, well, a business owner probably doesn't know how to go out and get X amount of Bitcoin. They will walk them through how to go get, whatever cryptocurrency they're demanding. They will assist them with, once they have the de-encryption key, how to utilize it within their system. They literally are customer service for these bad actors. It's unbelievable how efficient this whole process is.
Some of the largest conferences that you see in Las Vegas are for organized crime rings. There's nothing illegal about teaching other people how to do it. And it's really scary when you participate or even from an outside perspective and watch this happen to think how can this be possible? It's happening every day, and they're teaching each other how to be stronger, how to create these networks that are even bigger. It is organized crime. So when our customers on the bank side are subject to these things and we try to help them, our first thing is we don't know how big the fraud ring or the organization is. When it gets to my level, it's not somebody writing a bad check in a basement. There's multiple levels of compromise in multiple areas of their bank accounts, their customers' bank accounts, their corporate credit card programs. These are huge corporations. It's scary, but true. We get to see the ads, and the FBI shares a lot of information with financial institutions, right? The legitimate ads that are seeking people to come in to steal from U.S. people and companies. That's the ad, that's the job. And the better English you speak, the more you're going to get paid. But they're legitimate business ads for a job in Russia and China, and it's not illegal there to steal from us.
Absolutely. And just from our perspective too, from the DA's office, what we've done is we've actually partnered with a lot of different international organizations, local organizations, state organizations, to make sure that we're on the forefront of what is happening out there and how are we communicating when these rings are occurring and when they're brought to Wisconsin to do this type of fraud, so that we are watching it, so that we can try to stop it and or investigate it once it occurs. And we know how to connect the dots, because it's important. And people may not realize that we have 4 fraud organizations just in our state of Wisconsin currently. Our DA's office is a part of every one of them, even though they're not all local to our area because of the interstate highways. If it's coming through La Crosse, it's going to head this way, right? Because they're going to go down through Milwaukee and then down to Chicago. So we're making sure that we are a part of all of those different organizations so that we hopefully will see it before it gets to us. And we hopefully can identify who some of those people within the rings are before they get here.
I think we have time for one more question.
Well, when you mentioned China and Russia and North Korea and India and whatever, 5 years ago it was state actors. Are you saying that state actors have now been all replaced by corporations, or is there still a strong government component to this?
Yes, there still is, right? Trying to keep it as general as I can, but yeah, for the most part, all of that is still going on. A lot of it is state-sponsored, not all of it. But, you know, like Sven mentioned, it's legitimate business over there, and it's big business. And there's a lot of different ways to get into the business in some of these countries where we have very limited capability to stop and strike back without it being perceived very, you know.
Well, and some of it too is you have to realize that because it's such large business over there, they also are sending their younger residents, what have you, over here to go to college. So what are the college students doing? They're recruiting other college students here locally on social media to conduct some of these crimes. And that's huge. It's absolutely huge. And so it is not just overseas. It's definitely here as well. And it's a lot of it is here, and people don't realize how much of it is here. Partially because when they find out, or when the school finds out that it's happening on their campus again, it's like small businesses, right? They don't want the bad publicity, so they're not going to report it. Well, if it doesn't get reported, we can't help try to stop it. And again, not that we can stop it, but if we can show a hard-known presence that, hey, look, if you do it in our jurisdiction, you're going to get caught, or we're going to prosecute you. You're not just going to, you know, it's not going to get dismissed with a fine, or it's not going to go to probation. We're actually going to convict you with some type of a sentence. You know, if we don't do that, they're going to keep coming back here, right? Because they know they can get away with it, or they know that we're an easy target, which is part of the reason that we are trying to be on the forefront of, hey, look, if you do it here in our area, we're going to prosecute you, but we need people to report it.
And with that being said, it's also important when you're choosing those partners, whoever it may be. If you think of some of the larger financial institutions, and it's easy to pick on them, right? Because of their size, if the fraud, and depending upon the financial institution, is less than $50,000, they aren't researching a single thing. They aren't reporting a single thing. For a small business owner, one $50,000 payment is very, very meaningful. And to know that you have a bank partner who's not going to touch it is very disappointing. But it's not their fault. If you see what we see and how much every single day time we spend on investigating and researching fraud transactions, I mean, these are entire departments within financial institutions, even small financial institutions. But choosing your partners wisely depending upon what's important to you and really knowing what they're going to help you with and the size of payment. Because it really does matter in these situations. They can't even touch it. At smaller financial institutions, they may be investigating every dollar. But those are questions to ask. So you know your partner and what's important to you. And depending on the size of your organization, knowing what limits they're looking at to help protect you is really important.
All right, with that, I just wanted to thank everybody, thank our panelists for joining us today. Thank you all for attending. Thank you, everyone.